We are back in the Ways and Means room, and it is 10:55 on today's Wednesday, right? Yep, Wednesday. And we have spent actually Massachusetts has come up quite a few times this morning. And so I'm glad that we were so wise as to invite you to join us and share some of your experiences working on tax proposals in Massachusetts with us. So welcome, Mr. Baxendale.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have a presentation? Would love to sort of hear some of your thoughts, and then if you have time to take questions, that would be great.
I do. I have a presentation and then I'd be happy to answer questions and discuss afterwards.
Thank you. And if you don't mind introducing yourself for the record, that's a great place for us to start.
Sure. So my name is Phineas Baxendall. I am the interim president and longtime policy director for the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center, which has for 35 years been a policy think tank focused on state level policies in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I've been there for a little over 8 years and have worked on state level policy making analysis for the last quarter century at the Kennedy School and other places.
Thanks. And you're welcome to share your screen
Okay,
to take us through the presentation if that works for you.
sure.
Thanks.
Looks here. Um, Can you all see that just fine?
Yes, thank you. That's perfect.
Okay, great. So yeah, thank you, Chair Kornheiser and distinguished members of the Ways and Means Committee. The This presentation draws on the long debate we had about the surtax in Massachusetts, which gets called by many names, the 4% surtax, the millionaire tax, the Fair Share Amendment, chief among them. And I wanted to talk about really three topics. One is just the origins of this policy change, address some chief points of debate that occurred in Massachusetts, and then talk about some of the investments that have been resulting from this new revenue. So first about the origins of the Fair Share Amendment or surtax, how it comes from, addresses a over 100-year-old prohibition on graduated tax rates, talk about some of the investment needs that gave an impetus to it, and the trends in inequality, including those regarding racial equity. So getting to the first, over 100 years ago, there had been a constitutional convention in Massachusetts, and a lot of big changes happened. They decided not to give women the right to vote, but they did make some other changes which were unsettling to people. They first gave a popular ballot initiative powers, and they first created a state level income tax. And that was unsettling to people in the context of the Bolshevik Revolution and other changes that were going on in the world. And so one of the things they did is that they created what came to be known as the Uniformity Clause, which said that all taxes had to be, income taxes had to be levied at a uniform rate. And this was kept in place for until 2022, numerous sort of debates about changing it, it became the sort of accepted custom that then the longer it stayed in place, the scarier it was to think about changing it. But then in 2022, the ballot initiative, which ended up passing by popular vote, and this is what it said. Give you a moment here. It was dedicated. It's on income only over $1 million.
You know, it's wild. I live, as we actually mentioned earlier this morning, I live on the border of Massachusetts, and, you know, go into Massachusetts a lot for, you know, restaurants or culture or whatever, as do a lot of my constituents. And so it was really amazing to hear sort of all of the feedback from my constituents as this was happening in Massachusetts, and having people calling and writing to me and saying like, oh, wow, we saw the lawn signs in Massachusetts. Can we do this? You know, can we do it here too? So it's fun to sort of hear the backstory from you after just watching it happen.
Yeah. Well, great. I'm happy to talk more about that. I'll talk briefly about some of the trends with it. One was the variety of different kinds of transportation and education needs, which were the focus because that was where it was dedicated. But, you know, things like mental health support for students, things like being able to address climate change mitigation and emissions reduction, aspirations for new rail connections, trying to have greater access to higher education, variety of other aspirations, which have been kind of there's been strong support behind, but have really been stymied for lack of revenue for a long time in Massachusetts. And meanwhile, the trend, inflation adjusting over time, the income trends have really been so that those on the bottom have seen their income stagnate, and those in the middle, those in the median have also seen their income be relatively stagnant over recent decades, while those in the top 1% have seen more volatility in their income, but a clearly different kind of trend in Massachusetts incomes for those in the top 1%. So this is also a kind of recognition about where the money was going for looking at future revenue needs. And as I'd mentioned, race and income don't overlap directly, but there are clear trends where the higher you move up in the income ladder, the more white and the less Black or Latinx, Hispanic the group is. There wasn't even good enough data to be able to pull this out for the 1% due to lack of Black and Hispanic respondents in the census sample. But so wanted to talk about some of the factors in the debates of the amendment, some around marginal tax rates, some about who would actually pay. There was a lot of confusion over who would actually pay, and then issues about potential tax flight that were very much part of the debate in Massachusetts. So marginal tax rates is something that people do not find intuitive. You know, when people were opposing the tax, it was often language about, you know, if somebody income moves above this level, it will trigger the tax on their income, or the notion that in Massachusetts the tax only applies starting on your second million was not something that people really necessarily got, and people particularly didn't understand marginal tax rates because we hadn't had them in our state taxes for that 100 plus years. But somebody says kind of, well, what if I made, $1,001,001, and it sort of, well, that would mean an extra 4 cents of tax. That's what it would mean to have triggered the tax on you, is that it would only apply to that last dollar over 1 million, and people don't necessarily see that. And so when people talked about what it would do to the tax rate, um, they would talk about this as stacked on top of each other, or they would talk about that highest marginal tax rate, but not about how for people anywhere near that line, it would only apply to those dollars above the threshold. And there were even terms that by moving the tax from 5 to 9, it would be an almost doubling of the income tax, which is clearly not true, but had some resonance for people who were not understanding how marginal tax rates work.
We have a question for you.
Yes, please.
So in your example there, it is almost double. It's 50,000 on the first million, and it's 45,000 on that second 500,000. So it is almost double.
So sorry, on the first million, the tax is 5%, and for the next 500,000, it's 9%. So looking at the effective tax rate, it's 6.3% effective tax rate, the total taxes on that 1.5 million.
Right, but you make 1 million, that first million, you pay 50 grand. And that next 500,000 that you make, which is half of 1 million, you pay $45,000 in taxes.
Correct. So if you focus only on the very narrow, relatively narrow 50,000 instead of the effective tax rate, you can kind of squint and see it as an almost doubling. But if you're focused on the effective tax rate, it's not close to doubling. That was my point.
Okay.
So in the 1950s, for instance, our effective tax rate at the federal level was about 95%. This was a time of great growth, and people can find that hard to imagine how a 95% effective tax rate at the federal level worked, and a lot of it was that it only applied after a very high level. So it was only a very few people, and only on a fraction of their dollars.
Thanks. You can, I know you can't see us, but you're welcome to keep on going with the.
Thank you for the prompts. It is hard.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that you needed one until.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. So the data showed that the amendment would apply to about 1% of tax filers, and one of the things that was a source of great confusion was that there was a lot of suggestions that this would indirectly be a tax on businesses, or even small businesses, and this wasn't the case. But I wanted to just talk about why it was sometimes easy for people to misunderstand or to suggest this. So pass-through entities, whether they be S corporations, partnerships, trusts, are a way that was created to be a tax favored form for small businesses originally, but it has grown so that there are much larger businesses like Fidelity in Massachusetts and others that use pass-through entities as a way, and they were and it is the case that a lot of people who have very high incomes have some pass-through income, but it is not therefore the case that those that the tax on very high incomes is a tax on small businesses or pass-through income. And in fact, the data showed that only about 2.5% of all tax filers with any pass-through income had income sufficient that they would pay any of this higher tax. And then when you look, and that 2.5% of who would be paying it actually overstates the amount by which it would be indirectly a business tax, partly because, as U.S. Treasury analysis has found, while these pass-through entities were originally created with small businesses in mind, less than half of people who claim this pass-through income conduct any kind of traditional business activity. Instead, it's a favored method for passive investors or people who want to get tax breaks on a hobby, for instance, that this is a favored method for it. So it's not correct to equate any pass-through income as being someone whose livelihood is about running a small business. And then pass-through entities, even when they are businesses, are not necessarily small. As the Celtics or Fidelity or others are pass-through entities as a way to claim those tax advantages. The other issue
just
that
want
please.
to remind the committee that we spent a lot of time on pass-through entities last year. Back to you, sorry.
Oh, no, it's all good. Another issue that came up was a claim about that potentially this could be a tax that might not be for people who were, sort of consistently affluent, but might be hitting people who otherwise lived a very kind of middle-class existence and one year had a particularly large payday or sell-off of that.
Go up a slide.
Oh, can you go one more slide?
Oh, yes, sorry. And so there's luckily there's very detailed data about the persistence or non-persistence of people with very high incomes. And what it finds is that there's tremendous persistence of this of high incomes, that somebody who has a $1 million income is not someone who typically was leading a kind of modest income life before then. They typically were already in the top 1% or very close to it in the years before and the years after. In fact, only 15% would be people who just over 13 years would be someone who just crossed the threshold for 1 year, which the prior years and the post years also tend to be very high. So while it is possible that somebody could be a one-time exceeder of the threshold, it tends to not be the case. The data also shows it tends to not be from selling off assets. It tends to not be based on capital gains from selling an asset that makes the difference. And to the extent that somebody might have slightly exceeded the $1 million threshold, it is less relevant because they're also only slightly applicable to the tax. If they if they had a $1.1 million income, it's only the 0.1, the 100,000 that's subject to the additional surtax. The Department of Revenue analysis that happened a year or two before the vote underscores this. It talks about how people with incomes actually over 5 million would be paying, more than 2/3, fully 70% of the revenue from the tax, and 90% of the revenue would be for people with incomes over 2 million. So it's not a sort of people who are just tipping over the amount. It would be generally from people with much higher incomes.
Yeah, Representative Morgan. Sorry, we have a question for you.
I have a
Please.
question. So I think, sir, that might be true for people in Massachusetts. I think there's a different kind of taxpayer in general here in Vermont. People who are landowners, generations of farmers, loggers, who are using this asset as a life savings, a retirement fund. Do you have any data that indicates that for Massachusetts that, and I saw a chart recently, and I've got to look it up again, that showed these one-time people were in the vast majority, that there was something like a 5% stable line of people who would be in this tax bracket long-term, but that most of them who had only 1 year experience in this more than $1 million asset, a cash asset, would that they was much smaller, that it didn't extend on into the future. So I wonder if we're talking about two different kinds of taxpayers.
So there's, first of all, there's 3 major analyses about this issue of one-time tax costs. One was able to use Treasury data to look at all taxpayers over 13 years. I think it's 45 million individual tax records of 45 million tax filers who had ever exceeded it. And that is what the results were. It's the largest study of its kind. There's also an in-depth look at California, which finds essentially the same results. And then there's another study which is much older and looked at only, I believe, 64,000 tax records, and it is from a group. It's part of a paper arguing which the larger argument is against progressive taxation, but this is a smaller part of the argument, is this data set which isn't replicated by other studies, but which found something similar to what you're saying. Even that is somewhat of an overstatement, though, because what it found was that something like half were folks who had ever dipped into, as opposed to the snapshot at any one time being half. But there is this kind of outlier study there which shows a much larger amount of it, but it is very much an outlier, and I'd be happy to send you a study which sort of looks at these three different studies and documents the results of it.
That would be helpful, thank you, because I think Representative Brannigan particularly, but I think quite a few of us would like to take some more testimony on that issue of sort of, how often people are bumping over these lines.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean the other issue around people who might be selling long-time assets is it is not the sale price of the asset that is taxed. So somebody might sell a farm that could be over a threshold, but it's not the tax on the income is the tax on the amount that it has increased, the capital gains on it. And all those, anytime there's a generational change, those capital gains again get set back to zero. So then it's only when the new generation, the new owner, kind of takes it over. And then there's also deductions. The standard deduction for a home, for instance, is 500,000. And then any other investments that were done, durable investments to improve the property, can also be deducted. So if your headline is if you're focused on the sale price of it, it's the actual capital gain that would be taxed from it is generally far less than that sale price. So
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm gonna sort of, I think we're gonna do our best to hold the rest of our questions until the end if we
Okay.
can, so that we can make sure that you are able to get through your presentation.
Thank you. So there is a lot of evidence on millionaire tax migration and the possibility of it. The biggest studies are some studies that two academics who are then at Stanford, one is now at Cornell, had done, which are the sort of the gold standard of it, because they're able to look at all of the anonymized tax records, because there was Treasury economists who were also in the study and were able to bring in that data. And their conclusion was that, it is possible to find some level of high income tax flight, but that it occurs, as they said, only at the margins of statistical and socioeconomic significance. That it's very, very hard to find in the data, and almost it disappears almost completely if you take Florida out. And there's other reasons why people move to Florida, which kind of co-correlate with that. This can be hard to understand. One of the things is that, and we see this a lot in Massachusetts, is the people who migrate out of a state, especially a high cost state where housing is getting expensive, tend to be lower middle income people, and they tend to be younger. And that's evident in the census data that's evident since the surtax passed, is that we don't yet have we won't for another year or so have the detailed tax data, but looking just at the census trends of who is out migrating, it has been tended to be younger people. And there's more apparent kind of low and middle income. There has not been, the for sale signs going and property rates dropping in the most affluent areas as people are fleeing, as was suggested as a kind of warning of what we would see if we pass this. One of the reasons why there tends to be so little tax flight is, one reason is just that if you're, one of the perks of being wealthy is you get to live where you want to live. But moreover, wealthier filers and their families tend to be more embedded. They tend to have have kids, have a family, have a business, be embedded in the networks of where they live. And those are things which tend to keep people where they live, both for personal reasons and because those business networks matter for their continuing kind of income flows. The current administration has seen no evidence of a bump in high income out migration. The conclusive evidence, as I mentioned, won't happen until later, but they've looked for kind of preliminary evidence and haven't found it. They have, though, upped their revenue estimates. Initially there was fear that there were these warnings that perhaps people were gonna flee. And so they started with a small revenue estimate for fiscal year 2024, and then not seeing such a problem, they then increased the revenue estimate for what revenue from this surtax would be anticipated for the purposes of the budget by 30% the next year. So the fears about this are for the most part, I mean, I want to be clear that we won't know conclusively, but all indications are at this point that those fears are not founded.
I'm going to ask if we can hold questions until the end, folks. Is that okay with you, Scott? Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks.
So I'll just talk briefly about some of the public investments that have been funded from what is called the Education and Transportation Fund, because the money was dedicated. So we've seen on the education side, we've seen tuition-free community college for anybody under 25 years old, or for people seeking to become a nurse. Big increases of financial aid for students at public higher education. While a lot of states pulled back on the free school meals that happened during the pandemic, these funds were used to keep those school meals free. There's been a lot of investment on new kinds of green infrastructure in public schools, and some bonding also on the horizon for higher ed. And then a real investment in early education and care, subsidizing the salaries of childcare workers to address some of the shortages of finding adequate access to high quality childcare. And then on the transportation side, a lot of new investment, maintenance, improvement for public buses, trains, ferries. Most expensive of that has been in the greater Boston region, but also in our 15 regional transit authorities that we have in the rest of the states. Many of them have been able to eliminate fares altogether, and then increase ridership as a result. Many of them which have not had weekend service or night service for many, many years have introduced that. There's been new construction and repair on bridges and roads. Some of that is just starting up because it takes a while to put out bids and such for that. But one area where there's been more kind of rapid turn is in aid to municipalities to improve infrastructure, sort of immediate aid to the 361 cities and towns there for that money. So I can talk more about the specific mechanisms that we used, or in dedicating the funds, but that seems less germane for your debates in the state right now. So I'll conclude my comments there and look forward to your questions.
What was the last thing with the temperature gauge?
Oh, the temperature gauge is just not different. If you think about different revenue sources,
There, you got it.
existing along a kind of continuum.
Oh, okay.
So something like transit fares, where the people who pay them tend to be lower income, and they represent a much larger portion of the incomes of people. They're sort of very far on the regressive side. Something like sales taxes, where low-income people consume most, if not all, of their income, tend to be also much more regressive. And then as you sort of look across different kinds of payroll and corporate income taxes and such, have a greater level of progressivity, but a tax focus just on the highest portion of income is the most concerted sort of way to be addressing inequality, reducing inequality through the tax system. But I can, please go ahead.
Representative Beck and then Representative Odie.
Hey, Phineas, I'm looking at slide 16 of your slide deck there. And I was wondering if you could, yeah, there you go. Oh, you have it. It says on the first bullet line, it says, strongest research evidence shows the high income tax rate occurs, in quote, only at the margins of statistical and socioeconomic significance, end quote. Can you, put any context to what those margins might be where we start to see some of the tax flight occur? Is that referencing an amount that somebody makes or a rate or something else, age? I don't know.
So
But what does that mean?
yeah, I can tell you because we applied this to the Massachusetts situation, what was found nationally, and what we did is we looked at the amount of expected tax flight, and then we also applied an estimate of how much sales tax and property tax those households were paying, and we found that the net amount of revenue was 98.6, I believe, percent of the total of what the total would have been without any tax flight. So so that the tax flight was about 1.4% of that was being lost to tax flight. Now tax flight can mean people literally leaving, or it can also mean people finding avoidance methods, such as if they had been previously if they'd been previously filing jointly, that they might decide to file separately as a way to have less of their income, as a way to double the number of $1 million exemptions that they're able to draw.
That's the kind of detail we talked about. That wasn't really.
We subsequently enacted a rule that said that if you file jointly at the federal level, you also have to file jointly at the state level.
And we have that rule here.
Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah, most states do. Massachusetts was unusual in not having that. And there's some sense that may only mostly address that issue, but may not 100% address that issue. Well, I'll just say one more thing on this estimate is what these estimates about people who might leave from marginal rates of taxation are not able to consider is how people might be drawn to a state by greater amounts of investment, so that if a state has higher quality schools, if it has cleaner air and water as a result, if it has better infrastructure and other public amenities, that can be a reason for people to want to move there, not a reason for people to leave. And we did not hazard an estimate of that other effect on the other side, but there is reason to believe that it would not be insignificant.
Just a quick follow-up. So like, have you ever done any work on, like, I think you said the fair share was 4% over $1 million, I think it was. Have you ever done any work on, like, if that 4% was 5%, what does the margin become? 6%, 6.75%, which is kind of what we're looking at here. How that margin changes with, as you get even higher and higher up the ladder?
Yeah. I mean, one thing we looked at is the two states which have the highest concentrations of $1 million incomes, that being California and New York, and they're different because at a local level you can have taxes there, but if you look at New York City, for instance, the total tax rate there is, with the city as well as the state, the marginal tax rate ends up being about 14.5%. and in California, it ends up being, 13.6%. So, looking at those states, it felt like there was quite a lot of daylight there, and then seeing, in the course of when this started, because a constitutional change in Massachusetts takes 4 years to happen, for reasons I'm happy to explain. Some of the terrain changed over the course of it. Hawaii and Minnesota introduced much higher top tax rates. New Jersey, after their initial millionaires tax, kind of topped that up with an additional millionaires tax. So the number of states who had significantly higher tax rates increased over time. And I wouldn't want to speculate over whether, if that had been the case at the beginning, whether people might have chosen, 5% or 6% to start.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Odie? Okay. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, Representative Odie, what's your question?
So we heard testimony a little bit ago from another witness about the opportunity cost. What we don't know is who isn't going to invest in a state or who isn't going to move to a state because of the tax. So you have like long, maybe you can't even answer the question until you see. I don't know if you can ever measure that. Can you? Do you have an idea? Did you think about that? What did you look?
I mean, I guess you can just look at the experiences of places that have done this to try and set higher tax rates on the kind of 1 or 2%, and the experience tends to be encouraging often, so that they then continue to do it. I mean, I think people in California were tentative about it, and then have continued to, found that the kind of the lack of negative repercussions and the opportunity to be investing in public needs, that feedback loop was encouraging, and they continued. Yeah, I mean, there's
I don't want to put
sorry,
words
go
in your
ahead.
mouth, but you mentioned earlier that you didn't model sort of what increased in migration might look like because of increased services and sort of a more vibrant state based on, that new revenue. And it seems like this is like your question. This question is basically like the inverse or converse of that question. Is that it's hard, at the state level to be modeling what could come to pass or what couldn't come to pass based on like deep behavioral stuff.
Yeah, I have a follow-up to that, just because I ended up learning quite a lot about property taxes and school funding in Cambridge versus in the city where MIT is. That's also Cambridge. That's also Cambridge, all right, Cambridge. So here's a scoop. Do you have any geographical information about what's going on? Because we have a different property tax system for our schools than you do. So I learned that there was a tremendous amount of investment in Cambridge because its property taxes were so low. And then because its property taxes were so low and there was a tremendous amount of investment, it just keeps, the taxes can stay low, and the investment keeps coming in. So looking at the big picture, do you see that if you looked at income taxes together with property taxes, that could mean if you have lower property taxes, you could have greater investment even with the higher income tax. As what seems to be happening in Cambridge.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm talking to
So
you
do you
from
know if
Cambridge.
there are lots of millionaire, people making $1 million, $2 million or more from places in, but geographically in Cambridge area? So that, is that what's really carrying the rest of the state? You see what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, so I'm speaking to you from Cambridge, and I can tell you that people people, there's a lot of demand to move here, and I never hear about the low. It is true that we have low property tax rates,
Very.
and that is largely because we have somewhat higher tax rates on the businesses, and because we've had the main thing driving, boom, if you call it, in Cambridge, is that we have Harvard and MIT both in a small area, and there's a lot of investment around those higher education anchors. And there's I'd say the city does quite a lot, does everything it's allowed under law to make our property taxes more progressive by exempting but with a residential tax exemption on the first that makes relatively higher in higher value houses more expensive, and lower value houses more expensive. So there's a real effort to try and make our property tax system be more progressive, but it's not it. I really never hear the property tax mentioned as a reason why people want to move here. It's because of Harvard or MIT, or it's because of the investments that are made in the libraries, parks, et cetera here. And I mean, I think that statewide, one of the things we're hoping is that the money, the investments that are made possible through the new surtax are going to have some of that effect in Massachusetts. I mean, people don't. We're never going to be having our comparative advantage being as a low tax state, as I imagine Vermont won't either. We're never going to outcompete the Mississippi's or other places. If someone really wants to locate for low tax, they won't come anywhere in New England. There'll always be, Mississippi or Vietnam or somewhere else they can go to with lower taxes, but it's going to be the high quality education and other amenities that are going to really make a difference.
Representative Brandon.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. My concern for a long time now, at least 10 years, has been that the middle class seems to be finding it nearly impossible to move above the middle class, to improve itself. It used to be in Vermont that it was possible on a 60-cow farm to make a good living. They can't do that anymore. They need $1 million in assets in land and machinery and cattle. And the same with loggers. They used to be able to, anyway.
Make it work.
The picture. Yeah, they can't do it anymore. So I have thought of doing something like this about spreading that income around. And what we seem to be settled on here in this room is some kind of a surcharge on very high income. In Vermont, $500,000 is very high income. And I'm interested in what your slide showed that you did with how you invested it. And I had it here a minute ago. Here we go. Education investments in fiscal 24. I think that one slide would be a very wise thing for Vermont to do with this money, because get those middle and low income kids who otherwise can't afford to go to school, on to school to college, I mean, and they have, tuition-free community college, that would be great. think of what that would do to our nursing population and our, I mean, it would be tremendous. So how much of a struggle did you have to really implement those changes? That and the following slide too, transportation investments. That's an investment that affects everyone. And everyone experiences the improvement of transportation. You know, I can take a bus down to Boston and then take public transportation out to the airport and go to Ireland for 2 weeks. It's easy. So I don't know. I wanted to get into a little speech about, I had one kid at Smith and one kid at Northeastern. My kids loved it in Massachusetts because there was so much, so many things they could do that were free, that weren't free in Vermont. But I'll just leave you with that picture and instead wait for your answer on how much struggle it was to get these really positive pro-public, you know, very much improving the quality of life for the public, all public, every income level. I'd like to know how much of a hassle that was or not.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll say, my daughter goes to college in Burlington and has really appreciated the free bus, which I guess is no longer free. But
I think it's still going to be free for UVM students.
Oh, okay.
Or for college students. Just
Okay.
all the public transit.
Good to know.
Yeah.
She'd heard that it wasn't going to be free anymore and was worried, and it's just made it easy to not worry if she had her card, etc. And I mean, I think it can be a hassle in the sense that, you know, people there's a distrust to overcome, and for this particular policy change in Massachusetts came at, in some ways, the worst political time that it could be, that there was for its passage, at least, in that there was these temporary surpluses, budget surpluses, from largely fed by the federal COVID money, which activated a 1986 law that really people had forgotten about, and made it such that there was this temporary tax refund that got paid to people. And the governor was talking about how the legislature had too much money, and that's why everyone was getting this small check that was sent back. I mean, it was really, even though it was very temporary, the whole conversation was about how the legislature had more money than it needed, than it knew what to do with at the time. So I think that context made it difficult for people to understand the temporary nature of that moment. But nonetheless, it passed by popular majority, and I think if it was revoted on now, I think it would pass by a lot more, because the kind of sky is going to fall on your head warnings just haven't happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, and we have to wrap up, but it's really interesting that sort of we're in that moment right after all the federal money here in Vermont, where we have sort of shown what's possible with real government investment, but are on the other side of our, federal dollars and have a very tight budget year in front of us. And you all have been able to add this additional revenue so that you could have not experience a cliff from all of that and continue investing in, people and places and all of the great infrastructure that Representative Brannigan mentioned. So thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time today and all the work you're doing down south, and hope you can come visit us next time you come to Burlington.
I will. I spent several years working in Thetford as a camp counselor, and Vermont is a very dear place. I will send the study I mentioned, the review with the 3 studies about the one-time millionaire. I'll send that to the person I had.
Sorsha, yes, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay,
Thank you.
take care.
Have a great day.
Committee, we are coming back at 1:15 to do education spending, but want to remind folks that we have right now, we have a vote warrant on 629. Representative Demrow went over to the Gov Ops Committee and they just had one tiny recommended amendment, which was to add a sunset to the working group, because that's best practice. We should all try to remember to do that. Put that on the list of moving reports to December 15th. And then we have 289 after the floor today. Thanks, everyone.